Another walk down memory lane for you now. In the early 1980s, I was in my early teens and wandering like many in the industrial north of England where there might be work for school leavers. I remember ITN's News at 10 used to run a graphic on their Friday evening news bulletin. It showed where jobs had been lost that week. Margaret Thatcher reportedly complained it would ruin her weekend. And it was unremittingly bleak. Scotland's Central Belt, South Wales, Belfast, the northeast of England, the M62 corridor, the coalfields of South Yorkshire, the Black Country and so on. It felt like the Industrial Revolution played backwards. Well, it was summed up in a 1982 BBC drama series of unutterable but brilliant bleakness called Boys from the Black Stuff, starring Bernard Hill, who later found fame in Lord of the Rings. Hill played Yozza Hughes, whose signature question was, "Give us a job." Nobody could. It feels very different today. If ITN still had its jobs graphic, it would now be a tale of joy, not woe. A week ago, Nissan announced 1,600 jobs in Sunderland, with 4,500 more in the supply chain. Yesterday, Vauxhall announced an investment that would safeguard 1,000 jobs. This morning, news of another 1,000 jobs, mostly in wind turbine production on Humberside. Now plans for a 3,000-strong workforce in Blythe, in Northumberland, there to make electric car batteries. How many of these investments would have happened without taxpayer support for green technology? We don't know. And frankly, the communities who will benefit from the investment probably don't care either. Let's turn to the director of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership, who is Henry Merrison. Henry, welcome to you. The way I depicted it there, it seems as if we're going through an almost really quite historic metamorphosis. Parts of the country, the northeast, coal, shipbuilding, now cars and batteries, Humberside, hitherto maritime, fisheries, now wind turbines, renewable technology. Is that a fair description?
I think the change we're seeing in our economy is one that we absolutely need to see. So you have had that decline, that deindustrialisation. And although, Colin, clearly the northern cities, Newcastle, but particularly Manchester and Leeds, notably Liverpool as well, and down to Sheffield, have had a good couple of decades, actually, coming out of that crisis. They have reinvented themselves really successfully. But many of those more outlying areas that haven't got the benefits of larger economies have really struggled. And there are some bright spots. There have always been some bright spots. The defence industries, for instance, in Barrow, I mean, those jobs building nuclear submarines, we've had those for decades and they didn't go away. But I think in the case of the wind turbine factory that Siemens built on the north bank of the River Humber, that really was the start of a change in confidence around the fact that not only could we generate wind power in this country, we could also buy from a UK supply chain. Because the real point is you can decarbonise the economy, but buy the bits from overseas. And I'm a big supporter personally of nuclear power. We're not maybe doing enough of that in the UK. And buying ones from overseas, just buying technology, say from EDF, from the French, and I'm half French, so I'm not being in any way negative about France as a country. That's a missed opportunity when you've got the Rolls-Royce consortium behind UKSMR. We'll happily sell you.
Henry, we're going to do an item
technology
about it. We're going to do an item about it next week. You're absolutely right, and the idea that I think it is British Aerospace, BAE, isn't it, who want to build smaller nuclear reactors, and as you said, the French. Is it 75% of French electricity, maybe more, comes from nuclear, doesn't it? Just on a slightly different topic. I mean, I know you're saying this is a broad-based investment strategy, but just on, I mean, I listed there going through jobs dependent on car batteries. We did an item last week looking at the shortage, potentially going forward, massive shortage of rare earth metals. Does that bother you?
I think that we can't put all our eggs in one basket when it comes to battery technology. And that's why here in the UK, you have got people looking at alternative battery technologies. You've also got hydrogen. And I think the Prince of Wales was actually with a Welsh company that make hydrogen cars with a number of the industrialists behind that this week. So not just in the north of England, but in other parts of the UK, there are great examples of people looking at a range of fuels and technologies, because electricity and batteries is probably the right solution for many domestic vehicles, at least for the foreseeable future. But when it comes to hydrogen, the north of England also really leads on that. We make most of the UK's hydrogen actually on Teesside as a byproduct in chemical processes, but it's perfectly possible to produce green hydrogen. And ITM Power, a business based in Sheffield, are one of the largest producers of electrolyzers in Europe. So what you've actually got to remember is that today, I'm lucky enough to drive an electric car, probably one of the very few who do. Many more will, and hope we will buy them from places like Sunderland, where they'll be made by British workers. But I think that we've also got to remember that when it comes to decarbonising For instance, lorries. There are lots of other parts of the kind of road haulage market. Buses is another example where hydrogen may actually be a better technology choice in the long run. And I think a lot of the bus operators and those authorities that run buses are probably moving more and more towards hydrogen. So I don't think the UK's approach is all eggs in one basket. I think the car industry has gone heavily into battery technology, but I think the supply chains, as you allude to, are challenging. There are alternatives, though, that don't require those sorts of metals, and those are being explored as well.
Henry, in my introduction there I mentioned Margaret Thatcher. It was very much an article of faith of that government that you couldn't pick winners. The government couldn't pick winners. That was for the private sector to do. What's changed? It now seems that we think we can pick winners and we can use lots of taxpayers' money to attract foreign investment. What if it doesn't work? That money's gone. Our money, our taxpayers' cash is gone.
I think you've got to look at the role of the state and an informed actor. So when Siemens invested, for instance, to build their blade factory in Hull, and that's open and working, has since expanded, there was a modest government investment that underpinned that. But it was matched by huge inward investment from Siemens, who, as well as being a UK company, are a massive international firm. And Jürgen Meyer, who remains on my board, who was chief exec of Siemens at the time, was able to negotiate that deal because he was bringing significant private investment to the table. And I do think that if there are open competitions, if there's a clear strategy from the government, then a subsidy isn't a problem. Remember, we all pay higher electricity bills so that we could subsidise electricity in the North Sea and in Scotland in the offshore wind sector. But that technological investment, that investment in the supply chain, has reduced the strike price of that electricity significantly. And I think when you look at other technologies that may be a little bit less advanced than wind, you'll see the same, which is that, of course, whether it's through a strike price, whatever form of incentivization you give industry, or if it's a negotiated deal based on matching up private investment and public investment, those things are not inherently a bad idea if they're form part of a clear strategy. And I think what the government's got to do when it comes to innovation in particular is give our metro mayors, our great regions like the North East, Sheffield, Greater Manchester, where there are research-intensive universities, the type of significant investment that can really leverage private investment, particularly in R&D. And I think when it comes to those areas, you can attract significant investment. You look at what happened in Sheffield, where Boeing were encouraged to invest in a research and technology centre, the MRC, which I'm sure another one that some of your regional reporters like Kevin, I'm sure, will visit, or you'll come and see, hopefully, with us at some point. I'd certainly extend the invite. That was largely privately funded. And yes, the MRC receives public money today, but it's reduced the cost of the airplanes we buy for the RAF and the rest of the Eurofighter project. It's helped us make sure that we can remain competitive with the nuclear MRC in that sector. So an amount of private investment can often follow public investment. And now Boeing, as well as doing their R&D in Sheffield and in Rotherham, have a factory in South Yorkshire as part of their global supply chain, their only factory in Europe. So I think it does work, but it has to be based on leveraging that private investment. It can't just be public subsidies with no risk for the private sector. It's got to be part of an informed approach in line with our industrial policy.
You mentioned universities. Tony Blair, 3 or 4 weeks ago, said one of the ways we can stop the brain drain from northern towns, not so much cities, many of them have universities already, but northern towns, big northern towns. Somewhere, I don't know, there you are, I think you're in Leeds, somewhere like Halifax or Huddersfield, further northeast, somewhere like Darlington rather than Newcastle, is to actually really beef up their, not just further education, but higher education. Why not have a University of Darlington? If you want to keep people, the talent local, I mean, yes, OK, Siemens will probably train people from 16, brilliant technical apprenticeships, but why not actually say, OK, rather than saying fewer people need to go to university, more people need to go to university, but just keep them local?
I think we need high-level skills, but they come in lots of different forms. And a degree apprenticeship offered by Teesside University, I mean, Teesside University do have a presence in Darlington, so in a way there already is a university in Darlington. Another potential visit for GBNews perhaps to go and see it, because it's absolutely definitely worth seeing.
We should stop planning trips for us, Henry.
Well, I'm always happy to welcome you, Colin, to the North East and back to the north of England. And I mean, here in Bradford, I would say that having a university in a city that otherwise has had real economic challenges has been a real benefit. But you go out to Scarborough that didn't have a university. Coventry from the Midlands came up and set up a campus there. It absolutely has been a big benefit. But I would say that they've mostly made an impact, not just around traditional degrees, but by offering degree apprenticeships. So I think a lot of people do need those higher level skills, but they don't necessarily need to get them at 18. What I want to see, and I think what northern businesses want to see, is that whether young people come in through a work-based route, through an apprenticeship or through another training route, or they come through a traditional 3-year degree as an 18-year-old, they can get exactly the same skills. So a degree apprenticeship for someone who's retraining is as valuable as a traditional 3-year degree. And I think those providers who do that, the Sheffield Hallands of this world, that are as interested and present in Barnsley and Doncaster as they are in Sheffield in terms of where they get their students from, or ideas like taking a university to Scarborough, they absolutely have their place. But it's about, I think, giving towns better connections to the cities, because in Greater Manchester, no one complains they live in Bury, no one complains they live in Stockport, because actually you can get access to those great quality jobs. So for those towns are near big cities, actually a city centre is a great asset to a town. It's not a problem to be worried about or to replicate, because actually cities still have a role in the north if we're going to be able to compete with London. Because what we don't want is the north of England to kind of lose its spirit of working together. We want to be a counterbalance to London, to see London thrive and the north thrive, and it's going to require our towns and our cities in the north to do well. And there is a real linked relationship towards the success of, say, a city like Leeds and the towns around it that you mentioned in your question, because absolutely Leeds is a benefit to its neighbours like Halifax. You took Leeds away, Halifax would be a lot less prosperous place. It would have a lot less people visiting the Peace Hall at the weekend. It's that there is a symbiotic relationship between cities and towns, and sometimes we miss that in the policy debate, I think.
Henry Morrison from the Northern Powerhouse, handing out invitations like confetti, but they're all very welcome. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks for your time.